What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. This week we're back on the 62 C10. We're gonna be getting our 9-inch rear end from Quick Performance mounted into this truck, which includes our trailing arms and our Watts link. Then we're gonna be jumping back over to the front side with our new ball joints, our Willwood drop spindles, and of course we're gonna be mounting up our disc brakes. That way we could get our Detroit steel wheels put on and start mocking up our air shocks. We're also gonna be throwing in that LS3 and our 6L80 transmission so we can make sure we have all the clearance we need for our transmission mount and that we have the clearance that we're gonna need once we get our Whipple supercharger on there and we don't have an issue coming out of the hood. We're also gonna be throwing this cab back on so we can make some clearance for our transmission tunnel and possibly firewall. So we have a whole lot of work to do. While we're waiting for our axles and spindles to come in, we're gonna do some much needed work on this cab.
So while we're waiting for some parts, we're gonna fill in some of these holes on the firewall, give it a cleaner look. I'm on the plasma table designing these little ovalized cutouts. First piece cut, gotta see if it fits. Oh, like a glove. And this is thin gauge stuff, so we gotta move around a lot, make sure it doesn't get too hot, too warped. Still moving on with this bodywork. We've got another patch panel. For this spot here, I traced it out. See the rot? Try to make a compound piece here. And gets that sort of rounded edge. Instead of using a brake on this, because the brake would have been too hard, actually just using the vise, and this was thin enough gauge that I could hand hammer it to get that contour. The next step is dealing with this rocker under the door sill. So we got a big chunk missing there. We got a big chunk missing right underneath it, and some more rot up front. So instead of just trying to make small patch panels for this, since this is a nice long straight piece, we're just going to replace the entire thing. See what we got. Oh, it's detached already. Oh, there we go. Only a little bit of dirt. A lot of work, but we got this new rocker lower panel in. Needs a bunch of filling, but we're gonna go back and do that after all these panels are tacked in. Now that we got most of this filled in, we're good for now. We're gonna move on to the back of the truck where there is, you've already guessed it, rust. Have to make a nice round piece here, little piece on the door. What's behind hole number 1? What do you think it is? Oh. Oh yeah. Hey, what's this? We tacked in this part right here, and now we need to fill this gap. This piece right here kind of has a curvature to it, so our new scab piece has a similar rounded curve. We're gonna fit it in right there. We got that tacked in to start. Now we're gonna have to get a new rounded piece. We got most of the body stuff all tacked in, at least. This hole right here, that's where the fuel tank used to be, right behind the rear seats on the back wall where it looks green. So now that we're gonna have a fuel cell in the bed, we don't need this hole anymore for anything.
I am gonna tackle our new gas hinges now that this thing's bagged on 20s. So you could imagine our tires are gonna come up so high so that the old hinges wouldn't work. So Porterbuilt offers a hood hinge relocation kit. I put these in on Cha-Ching. They look great. I never really knew how they worked because, as you guys know, Cha-Ching never had a hood. So we're gonna find out on this one and see how they really work. So the first step is to get our center line of our cab, which I got here. Then we're gonna measure out 22 and 13/16 to each center point of our new hood bracket. So we're gonna cut a nice hole in here. This gets inserted inside of the cowl. Our hinge will come out of the cowl here, and then everything gets bolted in. I'm gonna make a template of this base down here and also a template of this front point. We got our hinge pockets laid out. These are ready to cut. We got our slots here for our hinge that's gonna come through the cowl. Our holes gotta be drilled. Everything is laid out, triple checked, measured 3 times, cut once. So time to start cutting. Hope we don't mess up. All right, now we got the passenger side all done, working correctly. And as you see, this one looks a little different than this one. So I missed a step over here. I forgot to add these angles. And you gotta read instructions. I try not to. I hate reading, but you know, sometimes you miss stuff. So these brackets are gonna hold on our gas shocks. Before you through bolt your hinge pocket into the cowl, you have to add these. So I'm gonna have to take that side back off, add these brackets. That way we can get our gas shocks on. So meanwhile, I'm gonna mount those onto this side, see how that all works out, and then we'll go back to the other side. All right, there you go, finished product. She's tight, can't even get her back down. So that'll hold the hood up. While I was finishing up the hood hinges, I went ahead and let Dave figure out how to mount up all those Airlift Performance components.
All right, so what we decide for all the Airlift components, we're gonna actually fabricate a box. This tape matches the top height of this, so that's gonna be where the new bed height is gonna go. So we're gonna build a box that's below this line, and that will house our compressors and also our air tank and controller.
All right, so David and I got this part of the box all bent up in our brake. We got that piece done. Now David's back over to the plasma table, cutting our 2 sides, and then he'll go ahead and start taking all that up and making it a box.
We got our box all squared away, but we got a bunch of tacks on it. On thin gauge metal like this, you want to use a lot of tacks. That will keep the piece from moving and warping, because you're going to be putting a lot of heat into this thin metal with a whole bunch of continuous TIG welding. Everything fits nice. We got our 2 compressors, our control unit, and our tank. Made this little guy to raise up our manifold. Now the time's come to bolt all of these components into the box. And that, we want to keep everything sort of symmetrical looking, all even. So we're gonna be taking a bunch of measurements, drilling a bunch of holes.
All right, so we got the bed mocked up. David is making a nice box to house our compressors, our tank, and our airlift management system. Now that we have that all figured out and laid out, we got our adjustments for our trailing arm brackets over here. The other thing we're gonna have to do is take this angle off both sides of the bed, and we're gonna be building a nice structure around the perimeter, so that way we can have like a false bed floor, and it'll just kind of hide everything and make it look nice. So we gotta get this bed off now. We got some shims in the corners of our step side, and in the back we have some 2x4s kind of shimming everything up, making it nice and level. We have our Bosch laser, which is putting a line around the perimeter of the whole bed. we're gonna make a mark on our line, actually 1 inch up, and that's gonna be where we're gonna be attaching our 1.5 inch steel angle, and that's gonna be our new false bed floor. Now that Khalil's got our 2 side angles attached to our bed sides, now we can go ahead and cut our front angle and our back angle. This back angle is gonna get welded straight onto these because we don't want to through bolt through the bed door. Once he gets those cut, we'll go ahead and bolt that front one on. We'll get this one over here, tack it in. And now we have our perimeter set.
Once again, it is that time.
All right, now that Khalil's got our angle bolted to the bed sides, welded on the back side and the front, we also got our Airlift management box dry fitted in there. It fits like a glove. We took all the components out at this point. This whole thing's gonna end up getting painted and looking all pretty, but she fits in there perfectly. While we're doing that, we got a shipment from UPS with all the components that we need to finish up that chassis. We got our Quick Performance rear end, we got the housing and the axles come in. All the gears and everything should be in this week, but we don't need those. We need this bad boy so we can start fabricating our bracketry and getting our 4-link all set up. We also got our rack and pinion gearbox and everything, so we're able to get that mounted up. We're still waiting on our upper ball joints, which I'm hoping will be in today. That way we could finalize our upper lower control arms, get our spindles put on there and our front brakes. I'm gonna get this stuff unboxed so we can get it all onto the truck. Let's go. In order for us to keep moving forward on the chassis, David is adding some supports on the front and the rear. So the first step on our task here was to center our axle housing right in the middle of our chassis. So we got a center part up here on our C-notch, plumbed it down to the center of our housing right here. So that left to right is centered. We also got it centered in the center of our C-notch. Boom. The next step is to get our pinion angle to 0, which in our case, it's not at 0, it's slightly off because our chassis on the table is slightly off. So we matched our pinion angle to the position of our chassis. Our next task is to get 49 inches from the outside of here to over there, which is where our 4-link brackets are going to be tacked on. In our case, we're still missing our drive shaft, all that kind of good stuff. So for now, we're just going to get everything tacked up. That way we could have everything set in space and we can move forward.
So we're at the point we're gonna tack these brackets to our axle tube. We got everything mocked up here. Both of the linkages are in. Make sure that we got the clearances we need. So as these arms articulate up and down, we have a nice wide gap here. There's plenty of space.
The next step is for us to go ahead and mount our Watts link. So our Watts link needs to be mounted to the center of our axle housing with the provided brackets. All right, and then our link arms will be mounted to our frame, one on the top, one on the bottom. So what this does is centers our axle housing in the frame, and as the truck goes up and down when you're going on your air suspension, this thing undulates, keeping your rear end centered in your chassis. All right, now that we got our Watts link put on, she's tacked on, everything's kind of the way it needs to be. We're not gonna final weld these brackets until we're all done. We'll end up taking this whole rear end back apart, bring it over to the welding table, and then we'll final weld all of our brackets like these in here. Next step for us is gonna be getting our wheels on it, figuring out our ride height. That way we could figure out our shock mounts in orientation to our C-notch and our rear end.
We have this little setup here where we can raise and lower our shock as we go up. As you can see here, boop, right there we got a little clearance issue. This mount, even though the theory of it's gonna work, the placement, we need to kick it out probably a 1/4 inch or so to make this shock clear this cross member. So we're gonna start cutting these guys off.
now that we got our tabs cut off and we're ready to start from scratch, David and I are engineering our new tab setup. So we kind of have a rough sketch of what we need, including some measurements based off of our air shocks. We got our sketch. David's gonna go ahead over to the template paper, make a little template, cut it out, and we'll come back over here, lay it out on the C notch and make sure it's all gonna jive.
Finally, we have our rear air shock mounted. Everything's just tacked in right now. This is gonna get boxed in. There's gonna be welds on the inside, welds on the outside, and welds on these nice formed in gussets. Bottom bracket came in pretty nice, but everything is mounted and aligned, and it's hanging nice and vertical to the car, just like the other ones. So we're going back to the front end of the 62, and that starts with these spindles.
What I'm gonna do is first I'm gonna modify our lower control arms. I'm gonna be drilling a nice 2.5 inch hole through here. That way our shock could pass through the bottom of this lower plate and we can build some mounts off of the lower section to be able to bolt our bottom of our shock through here. And then once we figure out where that's gonna land up here, I'm gonna be building the top mount off of this truss system from Porterbuilt. So this will come up like that and it will grab the top of our shock on the top. I got my access hole for our shock to slide through our lower control arm. David cut me up these 2 tabs, which will get welded down to the bottom like so, which will be able to bolt our bottom shock mount through this. And then I'll probably end up welding on some bracing to bridge these 2 together to hold it nice and solid. All right, I got my 2 tabs tacked on, boom, boom. Couple tacks, nothing crazy, just wanna kinda make sure it's all gonna jive before I go welding it up. So now I'm just gonna throw a temporary bolt through our whole bracket kit here, the little, let's go, get it through. Now we have a starting point where we could start working off to figure out our top mount. I made a little template here. This tab will get welded to this section here on the upper truss. We'll be able to grab that mount right here, and then we'll have 2 of them. We'll be able to weld these things together, making it one assembly, and it should be plenty stiff. Boom, voila. We cut it out on the plasma table. It fits really nice. I'm gonna be able to get a nice solid weld on the inside and on the outside of this bracket. I will be tying them together, bridging them up top, down low, making it real nice and solid. Now we're ready to cut these other 3 tabs, get everything mounted up, and we should be able to get this thing to air up.
Up. Let's see if we can get our headers on here.
All right, now that we got the motor mocked up, we got our headers installed, we wanted to check our clearance on our brackets for our shock mounts, which this side we got plenty of room, good clearance. Unfortunately, this side we did not. So I went ahead and broke these tabs off. I'm just gonna have to modify these a little bit, maybe take off some of this meat on the back because, boom, as you see, they are hitting our headers. So no bueno on that side, but that's kind of why we decided to, only tack these on and mock this up so we can make sure we have all that clearance. All right, so there we go, man. We got our front suspension all dialed in. We got our top mounts modified after we put our motor in. We realized that we had to make that clearance. We went ahead and just tacked everything in, like I explained, just so we could check all the geometry, make sure everything's going up and down smoothly. Then we come around to the back, same scenario. David's got his uppers and his bottom shock mounts tacked up in there. We got our Watts link put in at the rear end, all centered. Everything's looking real good back here. Again, everything's just tacked up so that way we could check everything, make sure it's going up and down smoothly. Once everything is all done and said and everything is going up and down great, then we're gonna end up taking this whole thing back apart, bring it over to the welding table so we could do our final welds. As you see here, David's making some notes. Little things like this bolt back here is, when it's aired out, is kind of rubbing on our bag. We don't like that, so we got a note there. We got a couple notes up front that we got to handle. But the next step is to make sure this thing goes up and down correctly. Hook up my temporary air. Now we're at ride height, which is about 4 inches from the bottom of the frame rail to the ground, or in this case, our chassis table. So when I disconnect my air, bam, frame is sitting on the table. Gentlemen, ladies, that's what you call aired out. We gotta end up taking this whole thing back apart, final welding everything, but for now, everything is perfect. We're good to go. All right, so now that we got all the suspension stuff done, we're pretty much done with the chassis. A couple little things left. We ended up pulling the motor out, hopefully for the last time. Andrew's got it sitting over here.
We're doing the displacement on demand delete. We're getting rid of the variable valve timing, and we're putting a new camshaft in it.
Don't forget that Whipple supercharger. So next episode, we're gonna be getting this thing off the chassis table. We're gonna be getting that LS motor back in. We're also gonna be getting the cab and probably the bed put back on it. So we still have a few more things to finish up with the suspension, but that's a wrap for this episode. We thank you guys for watching. Thank you for subscribing. We'll see you next week. Have a savage day. Ooh, a cockroach. You guys see that? Welcome to Florida.
Certified.
More dirt.